Hi, and welcome to another episode of Learning Leadership 321 with myself, Brian Webster, and today we're joined by the amazing Nicki Credland. Now, some of you might know Nicki from television. She's been on TV quite a lot during the height of the pandemic when the nurses working in intensive care were probably not given the best circumstances. So Nicki was the absolute forefront of advocacy for us working in these roles. Now, that is her background. She currently also sits as a reader at the University of Hull, where she reads critical care, and her full bio is on the website, so please do check that out. She's recently just won an Outstanding Leadership Award by the Intensive Care Society, so what better person to have as our second guest? Let's jump right into the podcast, and I hope you enjoy. So hi Nicki, thanks very much for joining us today on Learning Leadership 321. It's great to have you. So obviously we've linked to your bio and all about you in the blog and in the intro. So hopefully the listeners will jump over there and get a bit more about you and who you are and what you do and why you're so vital for this podcast. So, well, we'll just jump right in, Nicki, to a wee bit of an icebreaker. So, I want to ask you, and you might have seen on the website of the blog that I'm quite big on gratitude at the minute. So, I'm going to
Right.
start with a bit of gratitude and just ask, what's made you smile today?
Oh, what's made me smile today? So I'm actually in France at the moment.
Oh,
So I've
wow. Oh,
taken
my gosh.
so I've taken a 9 month sabbatical from work to do some research work and some leadership stuff. So I'm actually over in Normandy in France today, and it is a beautiful, sunny, warm day.
Wow.
February is usually miserable and wet and cold, and I'm sat here looking out over a big lake with lots of sunshine. So that's made me smile.
See, amazing. It's made me smile that you've actually took the time to do that when you're in France. So, thank you very much. That sounds amazing. I've never been. I really must go. So, second icebreaker for you today is a quote. So I'm going to read you this quote. So excuse the fact that I'm looking at my phone, but I like this one for you. It says, so basically, I'll read you this quote and I just want your initial 15-second response. So it's on leadership, obviously.
Yeah.
So it says, in times of adversity and change, the true character of a leader is truly revealed. So what is your thoughts on that?
Agree 100%. Leadership is absolutely easy when everything is going well. It's when everything is going badly that can be really, really challenging and really difficult. And a lot of leaders just disappear at the first sign of anything going wrong. And actually, the good leaders will stand there and they will stand up for what they believe in. So, absolutely agree.
I thought you might like that. Yeah, great. Okay, doke. It's interesting, isn't it? And I guess we'll chat about formal leadership education and exposure for leaders when we get into the talk. So that's great. So the point in leadership 321 is the first element is 3 points of leadership that you want to give our listeners. So what are your three best practices, best tips, best advice you can give to current leaders, aspiring leaders, people who are wondering, well, what is leadership in healthcare? And I say healthcare because I'm hoping to have some people who aren't nurses and, maybe get some other multi-professional teams in to chat about leadership as a overall. So yeah, what's your three best
Three
practice
top
tips?
tips.
Yes.
So, I guess my three top tips would be lead by example. So if we want to deliver excellence, then we have got to model excellence. So you can't expect other people to behave in a certain way or do certain roles or tasks if you are not prepared to do them yourself. So you have got to make people have enough respect for you that they are going to want to follow in your footsteps, in essence. So absolutely make sure that you lead by example. Never ask anybody else to do anything that you are not fully prepared and capable of doing yourself.
Okay, that's
Now,
interesting. So that
that
might tie a bit into delegation. So again, obviously, if we delegate, we'll have to delegate as a leader because we can't do everything. But again, it's about
yeah,
that, would I do that? Would I be happy if the leader or a leader said to me, Brian, go and do X, Y, or Z? So I like that. Yeah, that's a good one. Lead by example. But as long as you're willing to do it or have the ability to do it yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And delegation's absolutely right. And of course, we all need to delegate work. But sometimes equally, it's about thinking, yes, the easiest thing I could do right now, bearing in mind we've got a massive workload and I've got all of this work that I need to do, is get somebody else to do that job because it's easy and I don't really want to do it. And actually, sometimes that's the point of which you need to think, do you know what? It's a bit of a dodgy job. Nobody really wants to do it. The easiest thing for me in a leadership role is to give it to somebody else. But actually, the right thing to do in this particular instance is just to suck it up and do it myself. So delegation works both ways. Sometimes it's about what and when to delegate, and equally when to support staff and actually do the work yourself.
I like that, yeah. Interesting. Okay, doke. And I suppose that ties a bit into your leadership style or your favourite style, but we'll not get into that
Probably.
yet.
Hint.
Okay, doke. So if I take notes, please don't be offended. So I'm just going to write that, and then you could just start on tip 2 if you're happy to.
Yeah. So tip 2 for me is about supporting, caring, and genuinely listening to what your staff have to say. And I say genuinely, purposely. So too many times at all levels of leadership, we can all probably think of examples where we've been trying to have a conversation about a particular topic, and although the other person is sat at the opposite side of a table, for example, listening to you, they're not actually genuinely listening to what you have to say. And we all know that feeling of when we walk out of a situation or out of an office, knowing full well that that other person has not taken a blind bit of notice of anything that we've said, and how we feel about that. So for me, I don't want anybody walking out of my office thinking, well, she's not interested. She didn't listen to anything I have to say, so what's the point? Exactly. So it is really about making an absolute concerted effort to really, really listen to what your staff have to say, because often your staff can solve the problems that you're trying really hard to solve yourself. So genuinely listening to staff, for me, would be number 2.
Okay, that's interesting. And it always fascinates me, like working in healthcare and nursing, you know, we're sort of taught and embedded in the fact that we'll have to be compassionate and empathetic. And you look at some of your managers, and God, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but anyway, and you think, what happened to them? You know, and
yeah, I agree.
God forbid, when were they like that as a as a healthcare professional? You know, you think, gee whiz. So I don't know what happens there. I don't. Strange. But maybe it goes to the head.
I agree. Yeah. No. I think sometimes the more people climb the ladder, if you like, the more removed they seem to be to actually understand what other people are going through. You know, and there's a bit of a saying, isn't there? Don't pull the ladder up behind you. You know, and equally, once you get to the top of that ladder, it's very easy to come back down that ladder again. And a measure of your success in leadership for me is about if you've achieved however far up that ladder you've achieved, and then you've chosen or gone back down that ladder for whatever reason, it's about what the response of the staff are farther down that ladder. That is a measure of how good you are at what you do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I quite like the idea that leadership needs visibility, so it needs credibility, and that touches a little bit into management versus leadership, but I think visibility is key. And you sometimes see leaders more than you see managers, which is that different part of the you know, what side of the fence are they on? Should they be on a side? But yeah, visibility is a massive thing, isn't it? And you know, just going and seeing the team and speaking to the team. And if you're not a leader who's, you know, embedded in the team as such, but if you're a leader who maybe is office based, or for example, why are you not out every day seeing how everybody is, or having open door policies and such? But
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. Hopefully this podcast will solve the answer.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure we'll solve much, but we'll certainly have a step in the right direction. But that interestingly brings me on to what my 3rd point would be, because my 3rd point is about building trust. And again, that idea of being visible goes along with that, absolutely. So I remember a few years ago now, I was head of school at a university, and one of my strategies with my staff is I take them for coffee. I don't really do meetings in my office very well. It just bores me. I just don't like it. So I would rather take individual members of staff or groups of staff out for coffee somewhere. So we would go to different coffee shops around the campus, maybe just ad hoc, we just randomly decide we'll go for a cup of coffee, or equally if there's particular discussions that I wanted to have about certain things, I would still do it that way. And I'll never forget somebody saying to me once, I don't know how on earth you get any work done at all, because the only thing you ever do is sit with staff having coffee. And my initial thought was, oh, maybe I better not do that as often, because obviously people just think I'm just drinking coffee all day. But actually, part of my success as a leader, and it wasn't all the time because I got lots and lots of things wrong, but part of my success as the leader was that element of trust with staff, that they felt that they could have an open and honest discussion, and equally I would do the same with them. So it's not necessarily always been about in a position of authority with other people, but it's about trying to, flatten that hierarchy a bit, so that people trust you enough to have conversations with you, and trust that you will take actions of whatever actions that might be that they feel is appropriate. So,
well, that's good. Yeah. And already you're sort of either consciously or unconsciously taking away the hierarchy, because you're taking away, one, the workplace, two, your office as the leader / manager. And I found that a bit going from intensive care, and you'll be, frowning upon this, going from intensive care to community nursing, it's like the roles reverse. So when somebody comes in hospital, they become the sick person and they put on the sick role that's in the literature. But then when you're in their home, so it's kind of similar, that role reversal, they're the boss. So when you're taking the team out for coffee, although it's maybe not they become the boss, but it takes away that hierarchy of the institute, so I like that. Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah. It does. And I also found that, there are times, I was obviously a manager as well, so I managed 30 odd staff. And I found that because they're the behaviours that I mirrored day to day, when I actually needed to initiate some proper management behaviour and be very didactic and authoritative about whatever situation I needed to deal with at the time, it was met much more respectfully. Because it wasn't something that staff saw all of the time. They saw the go out for coffee, the open door, the various other things that we do. They didn't see somebody that was constantly thinking about targets and where are you and how many hours are you working and what you're doing now, why are you doing that, so that when you actually did need to do that, it had much more power towards it.
Oh, wow, that's interesting, because we've all probably had managers that you only tend to hear from when something's gone wrong.
Yes.
And I often see that, or thought that at university with the practice education facilitators, you only tended to see them if you were failing or if you were doing something wrong or if you weren't meeting the target. They never, again, visibility, credibility, they never came along and, oh, I'm the PEF for the area. How are you getting on? Is there anything you'd like to spoke out to? Or, it was always, not that I was failing, but, you'd see the students getting picked up and taken away because they'd not did this, not did that. So, yeah, that's a good point. Yep. Okay, doke. So that's your 3 points. Great. Okay.
That's my 3 tips.
Very good. Love them. Love them all. Right, let me go back to the script. So, 2 good leadership examples, and I'm sure you'll find this quite easy. I should have asked you 2 bad leadership examples. I'm sure you would have loved that.
I can think of those as well.
But the point of the podcast is to try and make leadership a bit more positive. Not that it's not, but yeah, so 2 good examples, real life examples. And it doesn't have to be about you as a leader, but it can be. It could be about anything.
So I suppose I'll take one that's me and I'll take one that's not me. And I'm thinking on the fly now because I didn't realise you were going to ask me about not my example. So I'm going
to... that's if you've got your examples, no, absolutely.
I'm sure I'm thinking of something. So mine, I guess, would have to be COVID. Would have to be the situation over COVID. That, I was at the time I was a senior lecturer at the university that I worked in. I was head of school already at that point. Sort of tootling along. I was chair of BACCN, doing what I do all the time, nothing particularly massive and drastic. And then obviously COVID hit, and the proverbial hit the fan. And well, all hell just broke loose, didn't it? And then just because of my position in BACCN, all of a sudden I go from probably a not particularly well-known person, apart from my BACCN stuff, to all of a sudden being asked by every news channel known to man to do some random interview at some random hour about some random topic. And that was, my initial thoughts was, not in a million month of Sundays am I getting myself into that. But quickly realised that actually, and it goes back to what you said about at the beginning, about how easy leadership is when everything's going well. And I could take all the kudos for being chair of BACCN, and I could take the kudos for being head of school, and I could take a kudos for being senior lecturer. But actually, you know what? It's time to step up and actually do the job that you're actually really, really paid to do. So for me, that was about making an absolute concerted decision that, right, okay, this is hitting critical care. We've got massive issues in critical care. The government are basically talking complete and utter rubbish about it. Somebody has got to speak out. So I obviously did for BACCN, and from a nursing point of view, and a colleague, Alison Pittard, she did a very similar thing from a medical point of view. And we kind of ended up in a bit of a tag team, the pair of us. So if they interviewed me, they interviewed Alison, and vice versa. And while we never actually particularly conferred about what we're going to say for each interview, we seem to manage to absolutely mirror each other's conversations all of the time.
Well, that's it. And it's because you were talking sense and truth, and
I think you've probably hit the nail on the head there again, and it goes back to what I think is a strength in leadership. It's simply about just tell the truth. Tell the truth. People won't like it. Not everybody is going to like what you have to say, and I got quite a lot of flack about some of the things that I said on both on social media and through the press. Certainly the anti-vaxxers and the conspiracy theorists, I got quite a lot of significant pushback from that. But at the end of the day, it's the truth. Just because people don't like it doesn't stop it being the truth. So you still have a responsibility, therefore, to try and support and educate and enable people to understand the actual situation on the ground. So I suppose the way that I chose to lead my element of the COVID pandemic is probably the thing that I'm most proud of.
Definitely, yeah. And is that part of the award that you got recently for your outstanding contribution to leadership?
Yeah, from the ICI, Home Cancer Care Society. Yes, it was. It was for the COVID pandemic work. So yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so what's your second tip? Oh, sorry, example. Sorry.
So I think thinking a bit more outside the box would probably be about the work of the Obama family.
Okay.
So, and I'm probably going to be a little bit outspoken now, which anybody that knows me will not be remotely surprised. But we've been so used to, particularly the past few years, the behaviours and characteristics of politicians, both, in America and equally in this country as well, that have been questionable. Let's put it that way.
That's a good word.
But then if we think back to the time that we had Obama in post, and his wife for that matter, they were equally outspoken. They held quite strong views about things, but they did so with dignity and respect, and that idea that everybody is important, everybody deserves their voice to be heard, everybody has their part to play in a society of any description. They weren't divisive, they were respectful, and again, not everybody agreed with what they had to say, but I don't think anybody could really disagree with the way that they said it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you think about that same situation with Donald Trump and with Boris Johnson, for example, I mean, people don't agree necessarily with what they have to say, full stop anyway, but equally the way that it's said and the way that those communications come across are divisive, you know, they're bordering on rude. Well, they are rude some of the time. It's a totally different way of communicating that doesn't have the same impact as an energy as somebody like Obama had, for example.
Definitely, yeah. That's good, yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? So I would class you and me as a term that I call constructively disruptive. So we're disruptive, but constructively, and you know, we're not throwing toys out the pram because nobody's looking at where listening to it. We're throwing toys out the pram because there's a reason to throw them out. And I struggled a bit with this at university because, again, being in although it was, you know, not only, I don't like, that's me being humble as a nurse again, but I was the lead representative for the whole school as a student. So obviously quite a lot of eyes on me, a lot of nursing directors follow me and the likes of yourself on Twitter. So when I would be constructively disruptive, I would get a rap on the knuckles from the university. And it was really quite annoying because it's that element of the mixture or the mixing up of negativity and reality. And, you know, I like to talk about the real things that, like nursing pay and staffing issues and, you know, all these things that are real, but some people see them as negative. But, you know, with toxic positivity is a horrible thing. And that's I want to hit that on the head. So it can be difficult because they say tall trees sway more in the wind. So I've struggled a bit the more I'm exposed to leadership, quote unquote, that God, should I have said that? And, you know, you do get frowned upon. So how do you deal with that? Do you just get on with it, or?
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of it is in the approach to it's not necessarily that the thing that you say is wrong or divisive or difficult. It's the way that it's done. And I can imagine a couple of my colleagues at work will be laughing at me when I say this, because I have a bit of a saying that there's more than one way to slay a cat. You don't necessarily have to go absolute hell for leather. There's different ways of actually getting what you want. And I think a really good example at the minute is the discussion around registered nursing associates versus the discussion around physician associates. And I've just been doing some work on this morning for something else. I'm speaking at a conference later in the week, so I've been preparing some work for that. And if you look at all of the language and the discussion around registered nursing associates, ultimately, we have a massive issue that, in the opinion of many people, myself included, is that registered nursing associates are being used to devalue the nursing profession. So we know that all the evidence points to registered nurses improving patient outcomes, safety, death, etc., etc., etc. But we're now in a situation where we're now employing nursing associates with less education. So they do their 2-year foundation degree rather than a full degree. And there is a significant amount of evidence now that they are being used to replace registered nurse roles. And there are significant concerns around that, certainly from my perspective, from a critical care point of view. But having said that, there is absolutely a role for them to play. And the individuals that undertake that role have an absolute right to be respected for the role of which they have to play. And the communications that are around that, I mean, clearly there's always going to be the odd one that's unacceptable, but most of the communications around the registered nursing associate role are supportive. Supportive of nursing associates in that, you know, we should be supporting them to do the job that they're actually supposed to be doing, rather than paying them a band 4 and expecting them to do a band 5 work. So a lot of the communications around that have been of a supportive nature. Now, if you turn that on its head and look at the communication with the physician associates, that is the absolute complete opposite. So there is, you know, I mean, some of the communications around physician associates have been absolutely completely toxic. Some of the stuff on social media has been completely inappropriate. There's been lies told, which can be proven. Individual people have been targeted, just absolutely inappropriate. And for why? Because ultimately both parties, doctors and nurses, are both saying the same thing, that their profession's under threat by ultimately the government, NHSE, choosing to employ lesser skilled qualified people to do their job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ultimately. But like I said, there's more than one way to swing a cat, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can't just shout and scream and be rude to people and expect to get what you want. And I think that's what we're starting to see in that debate now. From a nursing associate point of view, we're starting to see things change. We're starting to see trusts reconsider how they're using their NIRs in practice.
Right.
Whereas from a physician associate point of view, the government just seemed to be doubling down.
Gee whiz. It goes back to that whole, healthcare is compassionate and empathetic, and then we're healthcare professionals on social media are acting that way. It is quite shocking.
Yeah.
And like you say, the role is I guess an important role. I don't know too much about the physician's associate role, and then obviously I'm Scotland, so we're bringing out this. It basically sounds like it's going to be the same as the England equivalent to the nursing associate role. But we are calling them another confusing role called assistant practitioners, which I think already just throws a bomb into the minefield of confusing titles that we have in
Yeah.
nursing. And just as I was leaving intensive care, there was talk about they were going to have these band 4 assistant practitioners having their own level 3 patient, and I was like, okay, maybe it's a good time to leave.
Yeah.
Because then we're still, as the registered nurse, accountable and
Absolutely.
responsible. So
Yeah.
really, we've got 2 level 2 patients, level 3 patients then. Although we've got
Yeah.
a competent person at a certain level in front of the patient, when something goes wrong, or if they
Yeah.
do something wrong, it's us that's delegated or supervised, or so it is quite scary, isn't it?
It is. And it is, taking it back to the whole idea of leadership, we can't just keep quiet about that
No.
because it's unacceptable. There are implications, like you've just said, for patient safety, implications for retention of registered nurses, implications for retention of registered nursing associates. So, we absolutely should be able to use our voice to be able to affect change, but it's the way that we go about it and the respect and the education that we use to go about it that I think is sometimes challenging.
Definitely, yeah. And there's a right, as you say, they've got a right to the role, and there's a place for the role, but it's about that in addition to, not in replacement of the registered
Absolutely.
professional, i.e. the nurse or the
Yeah,
doctor. But God, that's a can of worms, isn't it?
it is indeed.
So probably takes us nicely on to your one leadership style. So I know that's kind of an impossible question in any sort of profession because it's quite fluid, and you've said that already. There's
Yeah.
times when you have to be authoritarian, if somebody's critically unwell or somebody's arrested, you don't really want a compassionate leader or a collective leader. Well, maybe a collective leader, but it's not really the time for, those sort of maybe softer, dare I say, leadership styles. And you do need that dictatorial,
Yeah.
you do this, Nicki, Brian's going to do that, you need to go and do this. But you've chosen servant leadership, so do you want to give us a wee rundown on that? And I've wrote a wee bit on it as well for the blog that I'll put on and link some further reading. So hopefully the
Yeah.
listeners can delve a bit more into that style.
Yeah, so it's interesting what you've just said about the fact that leadership is fluid, and you're absolutely right. So you'll use different types of leadership in different situations, and I can think of situations where absolutely I've needed to say, you will do this, you will do that, you will do this, I will do this, and that's very authoritative, and there's no questions, that is what you will be doing, end of discussion. But I think all of us probably have a style that sits there waving away in the background. There is kind of how we behave all of the time, and then certain specific situations will maybe take us outside of that style for lots of different reasons. So for me, I think mine is probably that idea of servant leadership, like you've just mentioned, and there's kind of a couple of reasons for that. So firstly is this idea that I've already spoken about, is that about leading by example. So you can't expect people to have the respect for you to do what you do need them to do when you're needing to be authoritative if they have no respect for you and they don't lead you normally. So you kind of have to develop your team, in some instances very, very quickly, cardiac arrest team, for example, to build that community and invest in that team very quickly. So building influence, building authority. What do you have as a leader that makes other people want to follow you? Why you were supposed to Joe Bloggs next door or somebody else 3 doors down the corridor?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's about the idea that if I want to be successful as a leader, then I am only going to be as successful as my team is. So if my team is successful, I will be successful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And vice versa. So then my predominant role as a leader is to make sure that I, 1, take them with me, and 2, make sure that I develop them and enable them to develop so that they can achieve success in their own right. Mm-hmm. Whatever that might be promotion, that might be well-being at work, that mean lots of different things to different individual people. But it's definitely about enabling employees to grow and develop and achieve success in their own right, at the same time as following you as a leader and the group of which, the team of which you're trying to achieve. Sometimes that's quite challenging because you inevitably tend to sometimes get viewed as a bit of a troublemaker. Because, and you can imagine that clearly I have had this on a number of occasions. Because your overriding idea is that you are trying to do what's right all of the time. Your overriding ethos is that you have a responsibility to do the right thing. And sometimes the right thing is not necessarily what the powers of be want you to do. Yeah. And I have no doubt whatsoever that I have been turned down for jobs because they know full well that I will not just say yes. Because it's absolutely completely outside of my entire character. So that idea of swimming against the tide and kind of being a bit unpopular because you really want to do the right thing can sometimes make servant leadership really difficult. But at the same time, that's exactly what gets you the respect of your team, because you are prepared to swim against the tide and do what's right. Yeah. So you're in a bit of a can't win really. Gosh,
so it's more about, I guess, the leaders to you and their issues than it is to you as the leader, because if you're practicing this leadership style that's obviously becoming great for the team, but it's the powers that be that are struggling with it, then well, more feel them. But then I could see that can be a bit challenging. Gosh, and it's interesting because there's so many different elements that, the more I look into it, that all these different styles do come into one another, like follow leaders or followship is a style on its own, but it's part of this. And as you say about that, it reminded me a bit about intensive care. So going from a sort of secondary acute ward where you maybe have 10, 12, 15 patients to yourself, to having one, well, depending on the area, the critical care area, but having one. And it might just be that simple thing like brushing somebody's hair for the patient. Yeah. But again, it's about that leadership. It might just be that, Joe Bloggs' son's got his football tournament and he wants to wait 2 hours early. It might not be that he wants a promotion or he wants to be put on 10 courses next month. It might just be that he or she wants an early finish once a month, So it's not about the big, massive things. It's just about that flexibility and being a human, really, isn't it? So I'm just cautious that we've got 6 minutes left, Nicki, of this daft Zoom.
It's about knowing your staff well enough, isn't it? Yeah. That if the staff feel that they're safe and they're supported and they're looked after, then they're going to perform better.
Well, that's
so instead of using a stick to beat them to make them perform better, when, let's face it, if anybody does that to me, I'll think, well, I'm not doing it.
Well, no.
Whereas if somebody's nurturing and kind and compassionate and cares, then I'm more likely to want to make them proud of me.
Definitely. Great. Well, thank you very much. So will we end with a bit of gratitude, if that's all right? Again.
Okay.
So when you go to bed, at whatever time you go to bed at, what would you be most grateful for in your life tonight? Or today?
My daughter.
Your daughter, brilliant. Okay.
Definitely my daughter. So I've got a grown-up daughter. She's a police officer.
Oh, wow.
Has a very, very, very challenging job in a very difficult area of the country. And I am super, super, super proud of her. So without question, it would be my daughter.
Great. That's amazing. Well, thank you very much, Nicki, and I hope your new roles go amazingly, and I'm sure
Thank you.
we'll see you again. So I'll just stop recording. So that was a great chat with Nicki Credland where we chatted about all things leadership. So Nicki's chosen leadership style was servant leadership, and she talked all about the reasons why that was. It was about building trust and building that compassion and relationships with the team that she works with and works for, to make sure that she gets the respect that she needs and earns and deserves as the leader, which then works handily when she needs to maybe tip into some of the other leadership styles that are needed in healthcare. Nicki gave us her 3 examples of, or her 3 tips of leadership. So it was to lead by example, to really show support and care, such as compassion, and really listen to staff and members of the team. And then building trust was the 3rd tip. Before going into our 2 examples, which were her contribution towards the COVID pandemic in her roles as a reader or a head of school in a university, as well as for the British Association of Critical Care Nurses. And then also the Obama family when they were in post, and how they basically how they were as leaders. You know, they had to say some tough things, they had to break some bad news, but the way they did it was compassionate, it was caring, it was empathetic, it was articulate, it wasn't rude, it wasn't authoritarian, it wasn't disrespectful. So we really hope you enjoyed the chat. I really loved chatting to Nicki. It was an honour to meet her online, and please do delve into the rest of the podcast blog where you can check, where you could check up on all other things servant leadership.